Okay. um, Hello, everyone. Chris, I hope I hope I'm not eclipsing your desire to get started first, but it seems like um, there's a bit of dead air there. So I'll fill it with some stuff, and then you can tell me to stand down as soon as you're ready to take over. Um, So I guess I'd like to welcome everybody since I have this opportunity. I'm Jeff Longadoc. I'm the executive director of CASI, and our Toronto branch is led by Chris Hayball, who is the, should I say, the perennial chair of that branch, the forever chair. I know she doesn't really like to think of herself that way, and I'm sure she'd welcome suggestions to, that maybe when she's ready to retire, others are ready to fill her large shoes. But she has been running that branch for a very long time, and it's been very successful under her stewardship. Um, right now we're in a virtual world, and it that has its drawbacks, but it also has opportunities within it. And what we're seeing right now is a large number of people who are in a position to participate in this meeting, who otherwise I think would find it difficult to do so. Um, I mean, speaking of, for example, our past president, Jacques Giroux, who is participating from Quebec City. I'm sure we have folks from further west. I wonder if Phil Ferguson is with us. Let's see. From Winnipeg. Oh, Paul Vanderpool is there. Hi, Paul. So there are many people participating in this meeting who I think would have found it difficult to make their way to the University of Toronto Institute for Aerospace Studies on Dufferin Road, which is where the meetings in person historically have been held. I'm delighted from the standpoint of CASI nationally to be able to provide a platform and the logistical support to assist Chris and her colleagues at the Toronto branch like this. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to be at their disposal on a regular basis to hold meetings as they used to be held, like clockwork, once a month on the third Thursday. So the meeting tonight, Ken Swartz is a recognized authority in his topic. I'm going to leave that to Chris for the introduction. But I'd just like to say to everybody who's with us today, welcome. It's great to have you here. I'm delighted you can participate. Those of you who aren't members of CASI, I'd encourage you to think about joining forces with us. The more we have as a collective membership, the more we can do, and the more people we can do it for, because of course our first interest is to serve our members. So again, welcome to everyone, and I'd like to turn things over now to Chris, if you're hooked up.
I'm hooked up. Thanks, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
So hello, everybody. Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us. As Jeff said, I'm Chris Hayball. I'm the chair of the CASI Toronto branch. Yes, I have been the chair for a little while, but always good to have some more members to help out on the executive. We have had traditionally, we've had a very full program of meetings every season for many, many years, 6 or 7 meetings in person per year. And we had a March meeting lined up for March 2020 and a very exciting dinner meeting lined up for May 2020. And then, of course, COVID came along and all of that disappeared. And I'm afraid I kind of had the wind taken out of my sails after that and was feeling quite deflated over the summer. And so it took me a while to get back into the CASI mindset in the fall. And it's only now that we're having our first Toronto branch meeting of the season. So apologies to our regular members who have hopefully looked forward to something every fall from us. We went kind of dormant in the fall, but now we're getting interested in things again, and this is our first offering. And of course, it's very different now. This is our first stab at having a virtual meeting, but big thank you to CASI headquarters for facilitating this for us. There's been a number of Ottawa branch meetings, virtual meetings that I've attended and have been very impressed with how CASI headquarters has handled everything. So I'm delighted that they're offering the same service to us here at the Toronto branch meeting. Normally, when I would open a meeting, I would have some announcements about perhaps our next CASI meeting or some other events taking place in the Toronto area that people might be interested in attending. I don't have anything like that to say tonight. I can't even tell you what our next CASI meeting is going to be about. We've got a couple of topics that we're pursuing, but nothing's been settled yet. But watch your mailboxes because you'll be hearing about it as soon as we have the next meeting lined up. And if tonight is a success, and I'm sure it will be, then hopefully we'll have a regular program of meetings for the rest of the winter and into the spring for you. So no other announcements from me. Nothing else to share with you. So we'll jump straight to the main event tonight, which is our guest speaker, Ken Swartz. So I'm happy to introduce Ken. Ken Swartz is a senior editor of the Vertical Flight Society's Vertiflight magazine and the eVTOL.news website. He's also president of Aeromedia Communications, an aerospace marketing communications firm based in Toronto. Ken was elected to the board of directors of the Vertical Flight Society in 2018, representing the Society's Americas region, which covers Canada, Central America, and South America. He's been a driving force behind the Vertical Flight Society's eVTOL industry initiative since April 2017. As a journalist, Ken has reported on the helicopter and aviation industry for more than 40 years for a number of publications, including Helicopter International, Heli Data News, Canadian Aviation, Wings, Helicopters, Skies, eVTOL News, Vertical, and Vertiflight. He's also written or co-written the corporate histories of many leading Canadian aerospace companies. Throughout his freelance writing career, Ken has also worked full-time in the commercial aviation industry since the mid-1980s as an international marketing expert with trade shows, helicopter operators, regional and cargo airlines, Bombardier commercial aircraft, and for numerous other companies as a consultant. In 2010, Ken received the Helicopter Association International's Communicator of the Year award for his writing and his heritage activities. On a personal note, I've known Ken since he worked in airline analysis at Bombardier. We were colleagues there, and our paths have crossed in various parts of the aviation scene in Toronto over the years. We were delighted to have Ken give a presentation to the CASI Toronto branch just about exactly 5 years ago in January 2016, all about the history of the Canadian helicopter industry. It was an excellent presentation, very well received. So we were very happy to have him come back and do another presentation for us tonight. I know that we won't be disappointed. So please welcome Ken, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, I'm just going to, I'm just going to do the screen sharing here first. Bear with me. I'm going to do a little gymnastics, and then I'm going to start with my PowerPoint presentation and then go over to a video. Actually, I've just changed my mind. I'm going to do the video first. And so just give me a sec here while I key it up. And then we'll go into the PowerPoint presentation. And so here we go. I've got two screens going here, so just bear with me as I share screen. And oops. Okay. And just want to confirm that you can see.
Looks great, Ken.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so This is about a 5-minute video, and it includes a number of different both VTOL aircraft and fixed wing aircraft that have been flying over the last, I guess, 4 years. I'll speak briefly to each of these. I wanted to start by, showing you aircraft that are flying, and then we'll get into a more structured PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to start this now. The first aircraft that you're going to see is the opener Blackfly. This is a derivative of the Skycart Rebel developed in Ontario. This program moved from Southern Ontario to California in 2014 after Larry Page from Google invested in the program. It's a fixed wing VTOL aircraft, single seat, and it falls in the ultralight category. Development's taking place in the States, but they have a secret flight test site in Canada that's been active for a number of years. The Kitty Hawk Flyer is another ultralight aircraft. This is Todd Reichert from Aerovelo. You guys will know him from the human-powered ornithopter and human-powered helicopter programs, and from the ETA speed bike. After they finished setting the world's land speed record for a human-powered vehicle, they were recruited. 6 of the engineers working on this project were recruited and to go to California to develop the Flyer. Kitty Hawk has suspended work on the Flyer. This is the Heaviside. This is their next aircraft. It's actually a derivative of a kite, wind power generating kite. Electric powered helicopters are also part of the mix. They don't represent a large number. This particular aircraft is a Robinson. Airbus has also got into the project both with programs in the United States and in Europe. This is the Vahana, which is an electric tilt wing test flown in Pendleton, Oregon. This program ended about a year ago. It was a research project. Urban Aeronautics is an Israeli company. This aircraft has been flying for a number of years with a Ariel turbine engine, but they're going to hydrogen electric fuel cell system. It's an internally ducted aircraft. SkyDrive developed this aircraft to light the Olympic torch in 2020. They will be using it in 2021. It's a multi-copter design. Dragonair was a participant in the Go Fly prize. The $1 million prize is still standing. Joby Aero is considered the most advanced of the eVTOL developers. This is their 2.0 aircraft, currently flying at a military base in California. In 2009, the Green Flight Challenge was announced and sponsored by Google. The Pipistrel aircraft here won the $1.3 million prize for efficiency. NASA has been active looking at distributed electric propulsion. The X-57 Maxwell will have a number of different wing configurations. It's currently being developed and has not yet made its first flight. Ampere is developing a retrofit of the Cessna 337, cutting the operating costs in half by using a hybrid electric engine. Electric engine on one side, conventional engine on the other side. Magniex is originally an Australian company, now based in the Seattle area. They have a number of projects for their electric engines. One of them is a retrofit of a Harbor Air Beaver, replacing the piston engine with a 700 horsepower electric engine. This is at Vancouver Airport. Aerospace is developing a 2-seat and 4-seat aircraft. The 2-seater is a trainer. Their goal is to dramatically cut the operating costs of flight training by reducing both the maintenance and energy costs required to train per hour. Magniex and Aerotech in Moses Lake, Washington have teamed up. Earlier in 2020, they test flew a electric powered Grand Caravan at Moses Lake. And this is an STC certification program in the same way as the Beaver. We're replacing conventional either piston or turbine engine with an electric motor. The main benefits are reduced operating costs. You may lose a bit in terms of payload, but as battery chemistry improves, you'll be able to gain back that payload. ZeroAvia is developing hydrogen fuel cell powered aircraft. They've test flown aircraft both in California and in the UK, and they're looking at larger aircraft, a family of hydrogen fuel cell powered aircraft. The Raytheon Technologies, formerly Collins, former Pratt & Whitney Project 804 was taking place at Mirabel. It's a hybrid electric conversion of a Dash 8-200. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share of that and go over to my PowerPoint presentation. So bear with me. Okay. There's a sequence to this, so just sorry, I'm just hopefully this will just want to confirm that you can see a full screen. Can someone confirm that?
No, we're actually seeing the overview right now.
Sorry?
We're actually seeing the overview right now.
Okay, so let's just go back again. And now?
No, you need to go to slideshow.
Yeah, we had it working a second ago. Bear with me.
Yeah, you just put that one back into slideshow and then just select the new screen. The one that's in full screen is the one that you actually want to share. So you can undo this share and we'll share the full screen.
Yeah, what I'm not seeing is the slideshow on my second monitor. Hang on a sec here. It was working before. Let's have a look.
There we go.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for your patience. Okay, well, good afternoon. Thank you. I'd like to thank CASI for the opportunity to talk today about the electric aircraft revolution. I've been involved in this sector for 4 years through the Vertical Flight Society and also through my consulting practice. My goal tonight is to provide you with an overview of the electric aviation industry, including the emerging electric VTOL, that's vertical takeoff and landing sector, the electric conventional takeoff and landing sector, and the emerging electric STOL or short takeoff and landing sector. So eVTOL, eCTOL, and eSTOL. Um, this industry is moving very fast, faster than traditional aviation industry. Um, and it's not just about technology, it's about an entire ecosystem, and in parallel, the development of business use cases for these new aircraft capabilities. Um, I will only be able to touch on a little bit of the story because there is so much going on at one time. Okay, a little bit about the Vertical Flight Society. The Vertical Flight Society was founded in 1943 by the pioneers of the US helicopter industry. You got to remember that it was wartime, and in wartime conditions, the usefulness of an aircraft was measured in terms of speed, range, and payload or bomb load, of which the helicopter had none of those qualities. The helicopters industry was somewhat shunned by the traditional industry, and so those pioneers got together and formed the American Helicopter Society to share knowledge and to advance the industry as a whole. The top picture shows the first banquet in 1944, and history in many respects is repeating itself, because when the American Helicopter Society, now the Vertical Flight Society, held its first annual eVTOL workshop in 2014, many of the people, the 100 people that were in that meeting, are today leading the charge in terms of advancing electric vertical flight. So the society is a professional society. It changed its name a couple years ago because it was no longer just helicopters. And this was driven by two elements. One, the growth in electric VTOL activity, plus also US defense investment in non-traditional vertical flight, everything from the F-35B vertical takeoff version of the fighter to the Osprey, and a lot of the aircraft that are currently involved in the future vertical lift initiative with the US Army, which includes tilt rotors and compound aircraft as well. The key membership is industry, government, and academia, and there are about 6,000 individual members and over 120 corporate members and 24 academic institutions around the world. This is some covers of the Vertiflight magazine, and if you look at each of the aircraft pictured, including some of the eVTOL aircraft, you can see that there's a lot more taking place than just helicopters. Helicopters may have dominated the scene, but there's a lot of technologically advanced aircraft being designed and even flying today. Some of you who are involved in Aviation Canada may know Vertical Flight Society as a sponsor of the human-powered helicopter competition. Canada played an important role in that the $250,000 check for the AHS Sikorsky Prize was awarded to Aerovelo here in Toronto back in 2013. So if we step back and say, okay, what's going on in the industry today in terms of electrification? We really have a number of parallel activities. We have electric VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft on one side, and we have electric CTOL. In many cases, the batteries, the energy management systems, the electric motors, and a lot of the other associated technologies are common. They are being used by both branches of the industry. So electric VTOL, why now? For many people, including myself, who've worked in the traditional aviation industry, I wasn't even aware that electric VTOL was in development until it suddenly burst on the scene. Part of it is because a lot of the activity was driven by people who were outside the traditional big OEM environment, coming from adjacent industries such as drones, automotive, etc. So we have advances in electric motors, advances in batteries, advances in flight controls, advances in computer modeling and simulation, and being able to do that at lower cost. We have composites, we have low-cost manufacturing, we have a movement towards performance-based regulations. So the regulatory environment is also changing, led by, for example, the rewrite of Part 23 in the US to make it easier for aircraft OEMs to develop aircraft and also to reduce the cost of certification by moving to performance-based regulations. We have other technological innovations, and then we have industry-wide disruptions, both in aerospace and automotive, that are spilling over. For example, SpaceX entering the commercial launch business, or Tesla entering the automotive business, which has served as an inspiration to tech entrepreneurs that other branches of aerospace are also accessible. When it comes to investment in eVTOL, it's been over $5 billion invested so far, and it's averaging about $1 billion a year into the eVTOL industry alone. So 10 years ago, when some of the pioneers were working, Sikorsky launched the Firefly project. Their goal was to take a Sikorsky Schweitzer 300 helicopter and put an electric motor in it and batteries. Everything you see on the floor were parts that became surplus and were no longer required for that development. They could eliminate, but the challenge was that it wasn't optimized. You still had the powertrain, the rotor system, tail rotor system that had been developed for a reciprocating engine. So the question was, is helicopters the way to go, or is there something else that can take place? If you look at distributed electric propulsion, where you replace single complex system with multiple thrusters, it opens up the design space. It also makes it possible to start looking at compound VTOL aircraft designs that include both a vertical flight capability, but also the ability to fly on a wing. So the pioneers of the eVTOL industry, and it keeps changing because some of these programs were secret for many years, are depicted on this page. We have in the lower right, we have the original eVolo, which was a multi-rotor that flew in 2011. And the pilot is actually seated on a yoga ball. A lot of people thought this is crazy, this is not serious, but then if you look at Volocopter today, they've made great strides. The aircraft above, the Project Zero, which was developed by Augusta Westland in Italy, later Leonardo, remained secret for several years after they flew. It only flew unmanned. The aircraft in the picture flown by Pascal Chrétien was flown in France, but Chrétien apparently got his commercial helicopter license here in Canada. But most notably on the lower left side is the Skycar Rebel, which became the first manned fixed-wing eVTOL aircraft to fly in October 2011, and that flight took place on in the yard of Marcus Lang in southern Ontario. If you've ever driven the Highway 401 and past the Big Apple as you travel between Trenton and Toronto, if you were to head 20 minutes up the road inland to the north, that was the original test site of the Skycar Rebel. So from obscurity, what we've seen take place over the last, I say, 3 years is we've seen a hype cycle where suddenly there's been a lot of excitement about electric aviation and especially electric air taxis. Some people use the term flying car, but that's frowned upon because very few of these aircraft are in fact roadable, intended to be on the road. So we're on still the upslope of the hype cycle. And you can see that there's excitement followed by disillusionment. And then slowly as technology matures, we actually come into the world of products. This chart was used and created by Vertical Flight Society and I think McDonnell Aircraft prior to that in the 1960s to differentiate between all the different experimental VTOL aircraft in development as part of the X-plane initiative in the 1950s and 60s. On the outer ring are 45 different aircraft designs, and what differentiates these aircraft are the propulsion concepts. And as you go around the ring, you have these different propulsion concepts and different configurations. One of the aircraft that was part of that VTOL initiative was the Canadair CL-84 tilt wing developed at Cartierville north of Montreal. 3 aircraft were built and flown. It never entered production. One of the challenges was the aircraft had complex mechanical control system, not a fly-by-wire system. And there was also cross-shafting between the 2 engines to ensure that if one engine failed, the rotors on the other would still be powered. So it was both heavy and complex, which worked against the adaptation of these kinds of designs. As we move into the current era, that chart has been redrawn and applied to a number of the different eVTOL concepts that we see flying today, which again can be broken down and differentiated by propulsion concepts. Today, if we're talking electric VTOL, there's really 5 basic categories. There's vectored thrust, where the same thrusters, whether it be a duct or a rotor or propeller, are used for lift and cruise. This would include tilt rotors and tilt wings. There's lift plus cruise, where there's independent thrusters. One set is used to take off and land, and the other set is used for forward flight. We have wingless designs. Those are multicopters, where 100% of the lift is provided by the rotors or the thrusters. We have smaller devices, which we call hover bikes or personal flying devices. This is either akin to a motorcycle or a recreational vehicle, a single person device, often with an element of excitement and thrill. And then we have electric rotorcraft, where the aircraft have a rotor. They could, if power is lost, auto rotate. And this includes both electric helicopters and electric autogyros. In April 2017, we decided to take the information that Vertical Flight Society knew about the electric industry and create a specialized website called evtol.news. And we put up all the information that appeared in the magazines. And at that point in time, we could only identify about 17 eVTOL aircraft programs. Since then, the industry has exploded, and we've actually established a separate directory on the site, which includes everything from the silly to the serious. The threshold for developing these aircraft is very low. Some people are coming into it from the drone industry. There's all kinds of things that you can make fly. Whether they have a commercial application is something separate. There's been exponential growth in this sector. And as of yesterday, there was 407 different eVTOL concepts listed in the directory, including 150 that were added last year alone, or an average of 3 new concepts that came to our attention per week. You have the numbers there of how it breaks down in terms of the concepts, with vector thrust at the top of the list, followed by wingless, the multicopters. And then there's a lot of other information that we put on that site that's freely accessible to anyone, and you can sign up for free to get a newsletter every 2 weeks. So some of the first concepts that came to public attention were the NASA Grease Lightning, which was a tilt wing, and the volocopter. And as the interest developed in these aircraft, so too did the interest in, or the question was asked, how can we put these aircraft to work? What are they good for? How can they be used? And what we see is a progression from the light end of the marketplace up into the urban air mobility and regional air mobility. Now, the interesting thing about this sector is that very few people are proposing anything that can carry more than 6 passengers. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is limitations related to battery chemistry and energy density of cells currently available. And the other consideration is that typically aircraft noise scales with takeoff weight. And if you're trying to develop a ecologically friendly aircraft, the feeling is it's lower risk and lower cost to develop from the bottom end and work your way up. But there are no eVTOLs proposed or on the table with maybe more than 6 or 7 seat capacity, and the majority in the 4 to 5 seat capacity. So eVTOL ultralights are one of the first categories of aircraft that caught popular attention. In the last 3 years, we had Kitty Hawk come out of stealth mode. We had Opener come out of stealth mode, Lift, Hover Surf. The US rules the Part 103 ultralight category. If the aircraft is under 254 pounds, it does not have to be certified, registered, and you do not have to hold a pilot's license. It falls in the same category as a paragliding device or even ultralight trike. The FAA also grants an allowance of 30 pounds per float for amphibious, for waterborne aircraft, plus it grants an exemption for parachutes. So you can exceed that 254 pound limit. Opener and Kitty Hawk both made over 20,000 flights with their aircraft. Kitty Hawk shut down their flyer program earlier this year. But Opener and Lift particularly are continuing their aircraft development. This was the Kitty Hawk Flyer prototype at Oshkosh in August 2017, flown by a Torontonian. This is the Opener Blackfly at their facility in Palo Alto, California. The aircraft on the far left was the one that was flown on Marcus Lang's property in Ontario, and there's been a steady progression of different configurations. Their first manned flight was in 2018. The unique thing about many of these aircraft, these electric-powered aircraft, is that they're being flown unmanned initially from a ground station. And then as confidence increases and the flight test program progresses, they put a pilot into the cockpit. In some cases that hasn't occurred. In some cases, they've advanced to fully piloted flights. Depends on the particular aircraft. These two Opener Blackflies are at the Secret Test Range in northern Saskatchewan, where they've been flying for 4 years or more. Another project that stimulated market interest was the Go Fly Prize. I'm watching the time here, so I'm going to move a little bit faster. This is a $2 million prize. $1 million is still outstanding. So on the left-hand side, you've got the technology-driven elements of creating an aircraft, different elements. And on the other side, you have the markets. So there's some people that have started from the market perspective and said, I have a market or an unfulfilled need. Here's an opportunity that an electric aircraft might fill. And then conversely, there's technologies that are being developed and they're looking for where can I put these aircraft to work. In some cases, they're looking at traditional aviation markets, but very few of the applications being considered are specifically helicopter replacement markets. They're looking more at markets that a helicopter can't serve either because of noise or economics. In 2016, Uber brought a lot of attention to this sector when they released the white paper in October 2016. They synthesized a lot of the industry knowledge up to that point. They also looked very closely at what NASA had been looking at in terms of on-demand mobility and thin-haul air travel analysis. And what they said is there's a great untapped urban commuter market that can be unlocked with eVTOL aircraft. But in order to facilitate this industry, we have to create an entire ecosystem. It wasn't sufficient for the OEM to just look at the aircraft technology, but you had to look at where these aircraft would land and take off, which engaged real estate. You had to look at the municipalities in terms of zoning. You had to look at the electric utilities in terms of the availability of power. Someone was mentioned at a conference that the charging station required for an eVTOL aircraft might be equivalent to the amount of power that a Walmart would require per each charging station or for the vertiport itself. I forget the distinction. You also had to look at certification requirements, which in many cases didn't exist for electric aircraft or for batteries. Uber played a very important role in bringing the industry together with a shared vision and engaging various stakeholders. It was a very unique scenario where the end user of the aircraft, who was not going to fund the development of the aircraft or operate the aircraft, but would contract the aircraft, was trying to bring the industry together. The vision for Uber was to divert their millions, a portion of their millions of passengers on road vehicles into the air to save them time and increase productivity. What they had is the big data of urban traffic flows, time of day, day of week, seasonality. They could also correlate that with income. And with that data, they could understand in terms of a big data analysis what the traffic flows were for all the cities in which they had a market presence. Because these aircraft would only carry 4 passengers, like a typical taxi or shared vehicle, and have a single pilot, in order to scale this, you would also have to scale the ground infrastructure. And Uber spoke of skyports or vertiports that were designed for high capacity operations, as well as transferring these passengers from the rooftop to the ground to a Uber vehicle, right? And so the concept behind this was to identify nodes within an urban environment that would be the ideal connecting points between ground and air, or even walking by foot. So there was a lot of creativity unleashed by architects around the world in terms of what these vertiports might look like. From Uber's perspective, they argued very strongly that an eVTOL aircraft must have wings. And they were looking at 2 things. One, the battery power required to cruise for an aircraft, and the battery power required to hover. If you can achieve wing-borne flight, you can reduce the amount of energy required, especially important if you only have finite energy. And the second element is if you can achieve wing-borne flight, you can actually fly faster than a helicopter and achieve higher productivity, generate more available seat miles per year, and therefore have a distinct advantage over a helicopter, and also ultimately drive the cost of operations down so that it's not such a big step to move out of an Uber Black into a eVTOL. So what they were trying to achieve was seat mile costs close to that of a ground taxi. They also looked at the technical aspects of disloading and power loading, and they lined up 10 partners, 8 of which were announced. And these would be companies that would be developing aircraft for their ecosystem. In the meantime, there were other companies developing their aircraft. Kitty Hawk grew out of Zero, a California company. And then the Cora project that Kitty Hawk was developing was spun off into Whisk, which is a joint venture between Kitty Hawk and Boeing. And this is a 2-seat eVTOL aircraft that is currently being flight tested in New Zealand and California. City Airbus is a project of Airbus helicopters that complemented the Vahana project being undertaken in the States. This aircraft is being flown in Germany, and it has 8 fixed pitch propellers, and it's also a technology demonstrator to learn. Lilium is another German program. They use small ducted fans, 36, on the aircraft. And the concept is a longer range, higher speed aircraft. Recently, they announced that they were going to set up a commuter operation in Florida. EHang in China has actually started producing their aircraft. They seem to be operating within an exemption to traditional aircraft certification, but they are developing this aircraft in China. They have Western investors, including United Therapeutics. They've done demo flights of this aircraft in many parts of the world, including Quebec and Bromont. In January 2020, there were a number of unveilings. CES, the show in Las Vegas, became more of a hub for this activity than the traditional aviation shows. And Bell unveiled a 4-ducted Nexus for the Uber program that would be all battery electric to complement a hybrid electric aircraft they unveiled in a previous year. Joby Aviation, after 5 years of being in stealth mode, unveiled their eVTOL aircraft, what was originally known as the S4, and now they call the 2.0, which is a 6-rotor tilt rotor with 5 seats. They announced this program in conjunction with new investments, including $400 million from Toyota, bringing their investments to over $720 million and placing the valuation of the company at over $1 billion. And Hyundai announced a $1.5 billion commitment to develop eVTOL aircraft. Joby last gave a technical presentation in 2015 at a VFS event. When they revealed the concept of the S4, nothing was heard or revealed about this aircraft for a period of 5 years. Recent patent filings reveal a lot, and here's the aircraft in its various modes. Over in Germany, we've had a Volocopter partner with both transportation organizations, but also first aid organizations such as the German Automobile Club that runs air ambulance programs, and they're doing a demo program. They've released a white paper on eVTOL aircraft in emergency response. Haven't put a picture in here, but United Therapeutics is a company founded by Martin Rothblatt, founder of XM Satellite Radio, a billionaire, looking at funding a number of different eVTOL programs to support the transportation of human organs for transplant that have a very limited shelf life. They're funding a number of different electric helicopter and eVTOL aircraft programs, including EHang, Beta Technologies in Burlington, Vermont, Tier 1 Engineering in California with the Robinson, and I believe Piasaki Aerospace in Philadelphia. Jaunt Air Mobility is another concept. They bought the license to the Carter Copter slowed rotor system. This is a heavily weighted rotor on a really a gyrodyne design, where as it increases cruise speed, it achieves primarily wing-borne lift, and the rotor is slowed to reduce drag. And so this is a compound design. They're one of the few eVTOL developers who intend to certify this as a Part 29 helicopter using the rules. As you get into this technology, there's a lot of other issues that come into play, such as crashworthiness for an aircraft that has batteries and electric motors and is made of composites. There's a whole new area. And then further permutations of the electric industry, you end up with hybrid designs where one part of the aircraft is converted to electric power. And this is a Bell 429 flying at Mirabel, Quebec, that has a electric tail rotor. There's 4 fixed pitch tail rotors on the aircraft in place of a traditional tail rotor. Similarly, Airbus is looking at an electric system to provide emergency power in the event that an engine failure, where a battery would allow the aircraft to safely auto-rotate. As we look at the advancement of where things are, this was something put together by Vertical Flight Society and Aviation Week magazine in about September of last year. And you can see that we're really, when it comes to prototype aircraft of commercial designs, we have vector thrust, multi-copter, lift plus cruise, personal and cargo, and we have a couple entering production out of those 400 different programs. The latest development is that Uber has pivoted away from eVTOL development and as a champion. This reflects the impact of COVID-19 this last year, where their food delivery services are actually much greater than their ride-sharing revenues. And we're probably all guilty of contributing to that if we've been self-isolating and ordering takeout, to the point where their mobility revenue is 53% of what it was year over year, while the delivery revenue increased by 125. As a consequence, Uber has been selling its longer lead time technology projects. Their self-driving car unit was sold, and they invested $400 million in the startup. Similarly, last week or 2 weeks ago, the sale of Uber Elevate to Joby closed, and Uber has invested $125 million in Joby, representing 15% of investment. Okay, eVTOL, I realize we're running tight on time. So what are the challenges? Technology, infrastructure, flying. There was a pilot shortage prior to the coronavirus pandemic. It's expected that when these eVTOL aircraft will say enter commercial service 2023, but more likely 2025, we can be in a situation where a lot of people have left the commercial aviation industry, and we'll have a pilot shortage again across all sectors. So the question is, where are these eVTOL pilots to come from, and how can you structure a rewarding career path? Standards and regulations, they're in development, haven't been completely finalized in the US or Europe, although there's great efforts to seek harmonization as well as to use standards to support these things. Public acceptance, noise, and safety are also very front and center. And then profitability. You can make the aircraft, but can you make money with it? And that's going to be a key element. This is a bit of a repetition. The other thing that, of course, is happening is it's not just battery electric developments that are taking place, but we also have hybrid electric developments taking place. The benefit is that you don't need the infrastructure of charging. You can use the high energy density of a liquid fuel to run an engine, which in turn runs a generator and charges the battery. And you can take the advantage of distributed electric propulsion on your aircraft design. The commercial path, really there's 3 people that are players that have to make money: the manufacturers, the operators, and the service providers, if, for example, it's a contract operator like an Uber. If we look to Canada, Canada is home for the world's most successful scheduled helicopter operator between Vancouver and Victoria and Nanaimo. And Helijet, which has been flying the route for 34 years, is looking at eVTOL to feed their trunk operations at low cost and low noise, both in Vancouver and Seattle. Okay, the other thing that's spooled up as Uber's involvement has spooled down is the US Air Force is becoming a major investor in the acceleration of this technology. They want to not create separate requirements, but they want to support the commercial development and certification of these aircraft and become a major customer. As a consequence, they have an air race to certification program. Joby is part of it. Beta Technologies in Burlington, Vermont, and Plattsburgh is part of it. And it's moving it forward. Okay, I'm looking at the time and it's, I guess, 5:58. I will continue to speak for a few minutes to rush through the, hang on a second, through the fixed wing section of this program. The eVTOL industry has attracted most of the investment over the last 10 years. But it's been only a matter of time before the conventional aviation industry took a hard look at what was taking place and also started to spool up new designs. One of the important milestone events was the NASA Green Flight Challenge announced in 2009, which attracted sponsorship from Google. The prize was $1.35 million for developing an energy efficient aircraft. The team that won was Pipistrel USA, centered out of Penn State in Pennsylvania. And the winning team was led by a Canadian engineer who's a professor of aerospace engineering at Penn State. So Canadians have been involved on that side of the industry as much as on the eVTOL side for the last decade or more. This is the Pipistrel Taurus. It is a unique design, but it achieved this record-setting flight and won the prize money. NASA has also been looking at distributed electric propulsion, and they funded a number of research projects going back over 10 years. One of their early partners was Joby Aviation in Santa Cruz. One of the projects they came up with was the X-57 Maxwell research aircraft. And the intent here is to look at not only distributed electric propulsion, but also the battery and energy management systems and cooling systems required to run an aircraft such as this. So, the systems architecture. This aircraft is in development right now. And I think over its lifetime, we'll have 3 different wing configurations when it's test flown at NASA Edwards. Pipistrel of Slovenia happens to be one of the leaders in the development of electric aircraft. Initially electric gliders, then electric trainers, and electric general aviation aircraft. If we look at the Canadian market today and we look on the Canadian Civil Aircraft Register, of the 37,000 aircraft in Canada, which is the world's second largest aircraft fleet, there are currently 10 electric powered aircraft in Canada, all in the ultralight or light sport category, including one Pipistrel Alpha Electra. So we're at the very early stages of this industry. Bi Aerospace is developing the E-Flyer. They originally partnered with Siemens, which was bought by Rolls-Royce for their electric aircraft engine technology. This aircraft is being developed and test flown in Denver. The goal is to dramatically reduce flight training costs. This is a chart that was produced by an old colleague of mine at Bombardier, Courtney Miller, who's an analyst out of Dallas. he observed that since 2000, there has been a sharp and dramatic reduction in the amount of short haul flying taking place in the United States under 500 miles. Part of that reduction is through result of fleet rationalization. Aircraft have gotten larger, turboprops have been retired, 50-seat RJs have been retired, such that there is not an economical aircraft available to serve these markets. He estimates over a 17-year period, $34 billion in revenue in short-haul flying left the US market. So if one wonders what are the opportunities for electric-powered fixed-wing aircraft, this is certainly one of the opportunities. The loss and decline of this traffic is airline consolidation, retirement of smaller aircraft, pricing increased disproportionately in short-haul markets, and then the hassle factor of airport security made the elapsed travel time, including terminal waiting, less competitive with the ground mode. So whereas the eVTOL industry has largely been looking at markets that are vertical flight markets and of shorter distances, and in many cases urban environments, the electric CTOL industry has been looking at longer stage legs, 25 miles, maybe out to 150 miles or longer. In some cases, these are routes that have been lost as air service has declined. So what are the projects that are out there? This is by no means a comprehensive list, but Ampere is developing the hybrid electric Cessna Skymaster. They replace one of the engines with an electric engine, and the other one is an engine plus a generator to power batteries. They effectively reduce the fuel costs and maintenance costs in half, and some of their customers are flying small routes, Caribbean and Hawaii, between islands, where that kind of savings is substantial. Magniex, which is originally an Australian company, now headquartered in Everett, Washington, are looking at the Cessna Caravan for the same thing, looking at short haul routes where they can significantly reduce the operating costs of the aircraft, operating a PT-6. Harbour Air has announced a commitment to go all electric. The political climate in British Columbia is supporting zero emissions or low reduction in emissions. Maintenance costs for Pratt & Whitney R985 are quite high. I mean, this is an engine that was designed in the 1920s. The battery weight may mean that you lose a seat or two relative to the piston variant, but with the operating costs less, you could still make money and then gain back the payload as battery efficiency improves. Ampere is also engaged with NASA on a project to electrify a Twin Otter, replacing two PT-6s with 4 electric engines. That's a program underway in California with a company that is a major rebuilder of Twin Otters south of LA. One of the interesting things in terms of both Harbour Air and Helijet is that they operate relatively short haul routes because of water. So the flights are rarely over 30 minutes, which means that if you have 20-minute reserves, you still can, if you have a battery with that can deliver power for an hour, you can address both the flight and the required regulatory reserves. So you have an interesting scenario in British Columbia of both fixed wing and rotary wing interest, to the point where an organization called the Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Consortium has started up there to promote the development of this industry in the West Coast and here in Canada in partnership with the National Research Council. In addition, you have the project like the hybrid electric Dash 8 200 at Mirabel. Now, this was a Pratt & Whitney Collins project, now Raytheon. They have slowed down the development of this aircraft in the COVID environment. But the idea is that you would have a smaller turbine engine and then supplement that power with a battery electric motor for takeoff and climb. One of the markets that this may be targeted at is Scandinavia. Norway has a mandate that most vehicles in the country will have to be, that are sold will have to be all electric by, I believe, 2025. Norway is an oil producing country. Of course, they have a very large sovereign wealth fund, over trillions of dollars, but they've committed to go green, both on ground vehicles, and the mandate in Scandinavia, in Norway, is all flights under 90 minutes will be zero emissions by 2040. When it comes to clean sheet eVTOL designs, you have the Aviation Alice. This is a clean sheet design optimized for electric propulsion. It's an Israeli program that has now been acquired by the same ownership group as Magniex. These are Singapore-based entrepreneurs from New Zealand, and this program is moving from Israel to Everett, Washington. Airbus did the EFAN demonstration project with a single-seat aircraft flying across the English Channel about 6 years ago. They scaled it up and decided that they were going to leapfrog some of the competition and develop the EFAN X demonstrator with with one of the engines converted to electric power to learn as much as they could about this. And they were going to convert an RJ-100 regional aircraft. This project was canceled in 2020 while the aircraft was being converted, I think largely because of COVID. Now, probably the newest development to appear on the scene, and I would say in the last 18 months, is the realization that if you have distributed electric propulsion and you place a number of motors on the leading edge of the wing, you can create a very high lift wing and develop a short takeoff and landing aircraft that's electric powered. And if you can achieve attractive performance on those aircraft, you can actually operate out of non-traditional locations, such as parking lots, stall ports, the roof of large warehouses and distribution complexes. So there are a number of companies developing eSTOL aircraft. One of them is Aeroflow in California, which includes a number of Airbus and Vahana people who are developing this STOL aircraft. It's, I think, a 3 or 4 passenger, maybe a 500-pound or under 1,000-pound payload aircraft. And they envision that this aircraft could take off and land in a site equivalent to, say, 3 large heliport pads. Similarly, Electra Aviation was formed by John Langford, who sold Aurora Flight Sciences to Boeing a couple of years ago. When he sold Aurora to Boeing, he decided to keep the intellectual property and the work he'd done on STOL aircraft. And so Electra is developing a hybrid electric STOL aircraft. When we talk about hybrid electric, there's really 2 forms. Some people are looking to diesel engines, which consume less fuel than a traditional piston aircraft, are relatively inexpensive as a source of power for these hybrid electric aircraft. Other people are considering a turbine engine driving the generator that would power the engines. In both cases, they have the ability to use jet fuel or Jet A as opposed to avgas, which is becoming more and more in short supply. In the last 18 months or so, suddenly hydrogen has become hydrogen fuel cells have started to be considered for aviation use. ZeroAvia has flown hydrogen fuel cell powered Piper aircraft in the US and UK, and they intend to convert a Dornier 228 19-seat commuter aircraft into a hydrogen fuel cell powered aircraft. Essentially what happens is that the fuel cell liberates an electron, which is used to power an aircraft. In recognition that hydrogen is becoming much more discussed in eVTOL circles, I believe it was last week that Vertical Flight Society held the first meeting of its Hydrogen Council with the intent of working together across the industry to advance the use of fuel cells. Okay, so in conclusion, wearing my Vertical Flight Society board hat, VFS has tremendous amount of free resources available for anyone who is interested in this field. We have the eVTOL news and we have the website. We are very active on social media. I was involved in initiating the videotaping of our speakers about 3 years ago. We now have over about 200 hours of video available online on electric aviation, both fixed wing and VTOL. For the last 3 years, we've also partnered with the CAFE Foundation, which holds the annual Electric Aircraft Symposium. They held the first electric aircraft symposium back in 2006. And so we've worked very closely with them, recognizing that when you have a VTOL aircraft that has a wing, it's important to follow what the whole industry is going, and it's breaking down the traditional silos that might exist between the vertical flight community and the conventional aircraft community. We're very similar to CASI in that we have a number of different technical committees. The eVTOL committee was added a year ago. Uniquely, VFS also has a history committee. These are people who are in industry but are interested in the history of technology, in some cases for its reapplication today, but also to track the activities of the pioneers. And this is my closing slide. And I'd be happy to answer any questions there might be. So I'm not sure who's going to do the questions. There is a chat here. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but
Hi, Ken. It's Chris here. I was just
Okay.
going to start fielding some questions.
Okay, very good.
First of all, let me say thank you so much. What an amazing talk. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I guess in some sense it was a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. There was a lot of information there. I know from experience that you can pack an awful lot into a presentation. And because it is being recorded, I think many of us may like to take a second look at it a little bit later at our leisure and get some of the bits that we missed the first time around. But thank you so much for the effort that you've put into this and very engaging manner in which you shared it with us. I'm just looking at the chat here. Actually, I've lost it. It's on my screen and now I've lost it again. Just a second.
Okay, as you're looking, Chris, I'll just add one of the things that drew me to this industry is that it's very rare to find a aircraft development industry that moves as fast as this industry. In many cases, it has the trappings of Silicon Valley. It's more like SpaceX than the traditional launch companies. It's more like Tesla than the traditional automotive companies. The companies have organized themselves more like, in some cases, the software industry. People put in long hours. They're very passionate about this. And it's been a bit of a thrill to see how fast things move. Literally every week there's something going on, and I can't say that. And it's exciting news, whereas I think most of the traditional aviation industry is pretty hammered by COVID right now. This is certainly a bright spot.
That's certainly a positive note. Being involved in the traditional aviation industry that's being hammered. I can certainly appreciate that. So I've got the chat window back again. I'd lost it on my desktop here, but I found it again. So there's several questions here. If people haven't been looking at the chat, I'll just read them out, and
Okay.
then perhaps Ken, you can address them.
Okay.
So Michael Hanna is asking, how do you see Canada's progress in this industry? Can you highlight the main work in Canada from the industry and the authorities' perspectives?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and it's also a question I've asked myself. When I would go to a lot of these conferences where we'd have, for example, last year there was 500 people in San Jose at the 7th annual eVTOL symposium. The 8th annual is next week, but it's virtual. There would be maybe 5 Canadians out of the 500, be stronger representation from Europe and Asia. The people I would see, there were some developers of stealth companies from Quebec, Ontario. The National Research Council was there. You would see some representation from Transport Canada. Talking to the early developers, in some cases, they went to the States because of the challenges of progressing their certification and flight test and certification program. Their aircraft were considered, because they wanted to fly unmanned initially rather than with a pilot, they were considered drones. So they were caught up in the red tape associated with drones. Subsequently, they moved to the States, and in some cases, the FAA instituted equally difficult rules regarding the flight testing of large unmanned aircraft. What's remarkable to me is in the last 12 months, the Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Initiative out of Vancouver has taken off in partnership with National Research Council. J.R. Hammond has done an excellent job of talking to lots of the players. The approach is not developer-led like you see in the States, but it's municipal and government-led, saying, well, how can we take advantage of this emerging technology, aviation technology? And I have to say that's unusual in Canada. So that's interesting. I'm still not clear in terms of where Transport Canada is leading in terms of certification of these aircraft. They certainly look closely at the FAA and they look at IASA. In terms of investment climate, I think that the US is probably a better investment climate right now. In terms of the Defense Department, the US Air Force is certainly moving very fast. People are submitting proposals and receiving contracts within weeks and money. Whether D&D is going to take a back seat or not, it's unclear. So I think that we're going to play catch up, but we do have a strong aerospace industry that is looking for diversification. And this is certainly an opportunity to dive in deeper. There has been programs in Quebec supporting the Bell Electric program, but full OEM production is probably coming. There are companies out there in stealth mode. That's certainly an opportunity to get in the ground floor or something.
Okay, thanks. Question from Guy. Has Blackfly started to sell units, or is it still in development flight testing?
It's interesting. One of the things you find with a lot of these eVTOL aircraft companies is that they're very mindful of their intellectual property, and they can go months or even years without providing an update. At Oshkosh 2019 in July, late July 2019, Opener Blackfly announced that they were starting production of the first 100 aircraft for sale. Of course, Oshkosh was canceled this year, but there's been no update on that. Their intent, though, is to sell to the public.
Well, it certainly looked like fun. I'm sure lots of people would like to have one in their backyard. There's not a question, just a comment from Jack. He says, the Taurus G4 is now a flying test bed for hydrogen-powered flight. That's interesting.
And that comes from the leader of the team that won the Green Flight Challenge. So that's very interesting. The hydrogen fuel cell was not talked about 15 months ago at a lot of these conferences, and suddenly you find people talking about it across the whole spectrum. It's amazing that these things pop up so quickly, although there's some people that have been talking about it for years, and now they're being seen as visionaries.
Okay, here's a comment, a little plug for CASI, coming from Jeff Bird at the Ottawa branch. He says, look on the CASI.ca virtual events site for a podcast on a recent talk in November covering the Air Mobility Consortium. That's an organization that you mentioned more than once in your presentation. And yes, there is some other material about that on the CASI website. Here's a question from Scott Gooby. He says, Lilium seems to have a complete system approach planned for EIS in 2025. One of their unique features is the 36 ducted electric fans with a reduced noise signature. Do you think they will succeed on schedule?
It's interesting. There's been a debate in some of the trade magazines regarding Lilium. They certainly are the second eVTOL unicorn in the sense that they've raised sufficient funds that the company is now valued at over $1 billion. But like Joby, there's not a lot of public access or transparency to where they are in their actual flight test program. They have announced that they will set up a hub in Orlando, right, to initiate regional flights. But it's hard to know because, as I say, there's not a lot of transparency in terms of where they are in the flight test program and where they are in certification. There hasn't been any recent video released of the aircraft flying.
Okay, here's a question from Sean. There are many prototypes in various configurations and degrees of maturity. Clearly, things can be built and quickly. How do you comment on the likelihood of maturation and certification being a bigger issue than they may expect?
Well, this is the thing. It's interesting. There are people that know exactly what's involved, and there's others that are, I would say, naive. They don't know, or maybe there's a bit of magical thinking in this industry. The serious companies are saying that for a 5 or 6 seat air taxi, they expect that the certification program will cost about $1 billion. The capacity of all 400 companies to raise that kind of money, it just doesn't exist. So there will be a shakeout of programs and designs. However, these small companies and these small entrepreneurs, their people will become employees or entrepreneurs within the industry. So the fact that the net is sort of wide and deep and many people are engaged is very exciting. But when it comes to commercial entry into service, you have that hurdle to overcome. Now, it's interesting that automotive has put money into this sector. Toyota with over 400 million in Joby, and Hyundai with a commitment for 1.5 million. That may be where the industry alliances and funding come from. In other words, this becomes a supplement to the automotive industry. The other area is, of course, twofold. One is the ultralight sector, where your certification costs are not as great, and your risks in some ways are not as great because of the way the liability takes place. And the other sector that people are looking at is what they would call the public use sector in the States, where government agencies can fly military surplus or uncertified aircraft for government missions. Similarly, the military does not need to have full civil certification. And there could be this latent or substantial market on the military side. So it remains to be seen also which are the ideal configurations. There are so many different aircraft out there that have unique capabilities. This is all to be determined.
Well, certainly financing can be a roadblock, but assuming that money was no object, it's amazing the number of companies that might be just there on the cusp with a potential product to certify. So maybe the next bottleneck might be the certification authorities. I
Well,
can't see them being able to cope with a sudden flood of all these new designs.
Well, the interesting there is that GAMA, in conjunction with many other agencies, including Vertical Flight Society, has been working a number of these things. There's an EPIC task force, which is dealing with electric technology. They're working with ASTM and SAE to set the standards and develop the standards for this technology. So there's been a lot of work behind the scenes. In some cases, Part 23 becomes an opportunity to certify an aircraft that has vertical flight capability that will spend part of its time, most of its time in conventional flight. And of course, the other thing is if you're doing a supplementary type certificate conversion of an existing aircraft, that's also another low-cost way to get your foot in the door, more on the fixed wing side than on the VTOL side.
Here's a really good question from Don Band. He says, are any of these groups seriously looking into the challenges of instrument flying and icing?
It's interesting. Uber very deliberately, when they picked their 4 demonstration cities before they exited the market, they were looking at Dallas, Los Angeles, and I believe Adelaide, Australia, partially because of the fair weather opportunities, less likelihood of flights being canceled due to poor weather, less issues regarding icing and adverse, IFR operations, which would be essential in some cases to have schedule reliability. It's interesting that Opener Blackfly, their test site in Saskatchewan, operates year round. And they've been probably flying there for 4 years. Some of the companies that are on the customer side looking at aircraft applications in Norway, of course, are very mindful of this as well. But it's not a topic that industry has talked about a lot. I know it's part of the mandate of NRC in terms of looking at this new technology.
Here's another question, perhaps motivated by more conventional aviation. A question from Ali Reza, who says, are governments working on rules and regulations for their traffic control?
There's a whole, as part of the ecosystem, that's a whole area that is getting a lot of attention. The story goes in terms of the Uber, Uber would talk about 1,000 eVTOL aircraft serving a city. There was a recognition that the initial integration would be like helicopters flying helicopter routes, relying on voice contact with ATC, and probably using traditional infrastructure. But should the volume increase, it would overwhelm the ATC networks. So NASA and FAA working jointly are looking at some of the technology being developed for the UAV unmanned sector and extending that kind of automated system above 400 feet to serve the eVTOL market. So unmanned traffic management, which may have been initially focused on drones, is also being expanded to serve this sector. And so there's a number of initiatives. There's a number of companies that are developing technology to serve those markets. It requires, of course, a regulatory change, which may come incrementally as data is built up from the operations. But it's certainly feasible that these aircraft could report where they are, have collision and avoid systems, or some level of automation as part of their simplified vehicle operations. but it won't be flipping the switch from one world to the other overnight.
That's interesting. That's another sort of blending or blurring of what we consider the traditional sort of drone world today into the electric, into the eVTOL flight regime. We think of these small, like quadcopter things operating, as you say, below 400 feet. The configuration is similar to the eVTOL aircraft, and now some of the other unmanned air vehicle infrastructure is going to have to extend to the eVTOL world as well.
And the other thing too is if you have both these aircraft in the same airspace, say below 1,000 feet, both cargo drones or delivery drones and eVTOL aircraft, there's also things you have to consider in terms of deconflicting these aircraft.
There's not going to be much room left for old-fashioned pilots like me. I don't see any more questions on the chat. If anybody else would like to write one, please do. I have a question of my own.
Sure.
I was interested in the, you showed the slide right at the beginning in your video, and then you talked about it later. The de Havilland Beaver with the electric
Yeah.
propulsion system that was demonstrated not too long ago. I didn't follow that. I remember it happening when it was in the news, but I didn't follow the story really closely. But then just thinking about it now in your presentation, and you also had the example of the Cessna Caravan with a traditional engine being replaced with electric motor. You think of those kind of aircraft as being bush aircraft, sort of can go anywhere. And you can obviously cache fuel in remote places for piston-engined aircraft. If there's not a charging station out in the middle of nowhere for these traditional sort of bush type of airplanes, can the batteries be removed? We think of an electric vehicle that has to be recharged, but can we actually pull out a battery that's dead and replace it with a fresh one that's been stored someplace?
It's interesting because about 3 months prior to Harbour and Magniex making their announcement, I was actually out in Vancouver visiting family and went down to Vancouver Harbour to talk to my friend who's the seaplane base manager. And I was asking him about electric aviation. And I actually asked a bunch of the old maintainers that rebuild beavers and what have you, when was electric aviation coming? And they said, maybe 5 years it's coming, but not too soon. And then of course, 3 months later, Harbour Air and Magniex got together and they flew the aircraft before the end of 2019. I think that the first application of this technology is going to be either on short haul routes where there are geographic barriers such as water or mountains, such that the aviation has advantages, but if you can drop the cost, you can actually grow the market. If you can cut the airfare between Vancouver and Victoria or Vancouver and Nanaimo on a seaplane in half, you can stimulate the market and pull people off the ferry. Similarly in Hawaii, the Caribbean, that's the first application probably for these. So these are areas where the infrastructure will be there. The flight times aren't great. There may be a bit of downtime in the middle of the day between peak demand where you can charge. The second scenario is cargo. You think of the whole feeder network of Cessna Caravans feeding into the FedEx network, aircraft that are relatively low utilization, single pilot, and they fly the same route every night, right? If you had an aircraft that has substantially lower operating costs, you could pull some of the high priority freight off the road and put it in the air because your cost of delivery would make it attractive. In terms of remote areas, there's a couple considerations. One, of course, batteries are sensitive to temperature, right? So then the question is, what are you doing to heat the batteries? Of course, when it's low temperature and when you're at high altitude. One of the advantages of electric aircraft, of course, is you still get the same power at altitude as you do at sea level because it's not, there's no lapse rate on the engines. So there could be scenarios, relatively short haul flights in the mountains where you have a charging station at one end. Hybrid electrics is probably going to be the more likely source of power for remote regions, where you can use conventional fuel until such time as the battery chemistry improves.
Okay, thanks. So the examples that the many examples of aircraft that you gave us tonight, are none of them configured to have removable batteries? Pull out the dead one, stick in a new one?
There were some eVTOL aircraft that had the batteries in a cargo pod, so you'd be swapping the cargo and the battery at the same time.
Oh, that's neat.
And they were looking at an eVTOL that maybe does cargo and you swap out a container, you put a container, but the container has an integral battery. When I talked to the guys at the seaplane dock, the whole idea of removing a battery at a dock over seawater, the logistics of that, and I think the industry's not geared that way. The scenario is that you could perhaps with rapid recharge, so you have a fully charged battery, you fly a series of legs during the day where there's a degradation, and you do a fast recharge when you're turning the aircraft. That's how people are more thinking about it. And then a full charge in the middle of the day, and then in the next peak area. That's how Uber was looking at this.
Obviously, lots of different things to think about compared to traditional notions of aircraft refueling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any more questions posted. I'm also looking at the time. It's 6:39, so we've gone a little bit beyond our nominal 1.5 hour time slot. I'm also looking at the list of participants. We had a high of 109 at one point earlier in the evening. I was watching it every few minutes, and that was the largest number I saw. And now it's gone down to 66. So I guess a few people have got hungry for their dinner and they've dropped out. So that's probably a hint that it's time to say goodnight here.
Okay.
If there's no other comments from the audience, then I'd like to reiterate my thanks to Ken. Excellent presentation, excellent discussion afterwards, really enjoyable evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll give you a virtual round of applause. You can imagine hearing all of the appreciation coming from the audience.
Well, thank you. And if anyone does want to get in touch with me, probably the best way is on LinkedIn, Kenneth Swartz. And if you do Kenneth Swartz and Vertical Flight Society, my name will probably pop up as well. And I'm also interested in hearing what, from people and, some feedback as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you again for sharing your evening and your knowledge and enthusiasm for the topic with us. As I said at the beginning of the evening, hopefully this is the first of many CASI Toronto branch virtual meetings. I think we've got off to a good start here. Big thank you to CASI headquarters for facilitating the Zoom angle for us. Watch your mailboxes for our next offering. I can't tell you what it will be, but we're looking at several potential topics for our next foray into the virtual meeting world. So hopefully we can keep up our traditional schedule of one meeting a month, and we'll try to stick to the third Thursday of the month and have something for you for the rest of the winter. So normally I would close by saying, safe drive home, everybody. I don't need to say that this time, but thank you everybody for joining us. Enjoy your dinner. I'm sure you're getting hungry, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at the next Toronto branch CASI virtual meeting.
Good night. Thank you.
Todd, do you want to add anything from the CASI side? I think we've lost Jeff.
we have lost Chef, I'm afraid. And the only thing I would like to add is watch for a version of this on the CASI website. We will be posting it to the podcast section within the next day or two.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much for your help, Todd.
You're very welcome.
Bye-bye.
Good night,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.